everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guests are the co-writers of the upcoming Dark Horse miniseries, Minor Threats. It's Jordan Blum and Patton Oswalt. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having us. Seriously, I'm glad this worked out. I know our schedules have been crazy, so thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome to be back. Thank you.
So we're recording this on Friday, July 15th, which means I just feel like you got to be in the middle of like promoting this because I know FOC, Final Order Cutoff, is coming up for #1. How's spreading the good word of Twilight City going?
It's been really fun. We got to do some really cool podcasts, some great interviews. And then the response a lot of this is up to us. You know, when you, a comic creator, for the most part, the promotion is up to you, but the reactions on Instagram and Twitter have been amazing.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a good sign that we never get sick of talking about it, or it leads to us being like, oh, wait,
Yes.
That's a good point. Let's save that for, hopefully we get to do another story arc in this universe. Let's write that down. So it's kind of just been fun to finally get to talk about it and then kind of build out from there.
Well, I imagine that's one of the cool things about like diving into the conversations and like kind of hearing other people's perspectives. Not that you're taking things from what other people are saying, but you start realizing like maybe this corner is pretty interesting, or maybe we could do this with this. It's like those conversations might brighten up your brain and make you think about certain things that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
Yeah, we've done a couple of interviews where in the interview we've suddenly gotten ideas for things in Twilight City that we want to expand on. Like talking about it feels like talking about a real place. It feels like gossiping about a real place, which is cool.
All right. Well, before we get into Minor Threats, I want to talk a little bit about your background. The reason why I want to talk about this is it really does, Minor Threats, and very much does feel like a love letter to comics history. And I know a bit about Jordan's history. It's fairly similar to mine, to be honest. But Patton, I want to start with you on this. Like, what were the comics that first made you fall in love with comics? Like, what set you on this path?
When I was young, it was Marvel. It was weird. It wasn't like even specific comics. Comics and comic book characters and superheroes were just part of the world. So, you know, the Spider-Man cartoon, the Fantastic Four cartoon, that led to, these are also comics. And then, you know, just looking at the artwork, I wasn't even as blown away by the stories as I was seeing the artwork and seeing how someone could capture motion in a drawing. I wanted to try to be a comic book artist. I was terrible. That whole world of absolute creativity, whatever you have in your brain, you can put on paper and start moving. You know, Marvel, DC, I remember a lot of horror comics growing up. A lot of that stuff really grabbed me, how they could use that. Wow, these are just drawings, but they're scary. How is somebody doing this? I love it. Yeah. So, you know, I can't point to a specific comics, but what I can point to is comics being part of the vernacular. Mm-hmm. Like, why is that's just part of the story?
Yeah, Jordan, not to speak for you, but I mean, like, we were growing up about the same time, and it was like I was really into Transformers, just everything. I was basically worshipped at the altar of Optimus Prime. Marvel Transformers comics got me in there, but then X-Men the animated series and Batman the animated series, like those separate things, and then it just became this thing where it just felt like comics were part of my life, and I started reading, and I just haven't basically stopped since. That stuff hooks you.
Totally. I feel like I can't tell you if I read a Jack Kirby Superpowers comic first or I had the Superpowers action figures. It just all felt like it was happening at the same time. Or if I had Secret Wars too, you know, where it was just like, it's there. The toys are there. The comics are there. I'm going to play and then continue as I read into the story. And it was all just one thing.
Yeah. Well, you know, a big part of Minor Threats are the C-listers, the career villains. It's funny, like, I was thinking about it, and for some reason, the character that I was thinking of when I was thinking about the people the denizens of the lower layer wasn't like any classic villains as much as I was thinking of, you ever see Rounders? Either of you ever see Rounders?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Several times. That's a great movie.
It is. Like, John Turturro's character in that, Joey Knish, it reminds me of them, because it's like, you know, it's not the one that's going to the World Series of Poker. It's the grinders. It's the ones who are out there just trying to make a living.
Yeah.
And like those characters have always been a big part of like Marvel Universe, DC Universe, et cetera, et cetera. It's like a special breed that fans, you know, Jordan knows this. I am like a massive Stiltman fan. That's my guy. But for you, you know, we'll start with you, Jordan. Like, what's the appeal of those kind of C-listers, those ones that the lovable losers from the villain world?
Well, what I think is so great is they all have like such a fun gimmick. Like most of them were created in the Silver Age, Bronze Age, you know, to be these one-off villains or They didn't have this bigger Infinity Gauntlet storyline mapped out. It was just they were going to rob a jewelry store and get webbed up, and Spidey would leave a little sign on it, dangling from them for the cops.
I'm sorry. I just love the idea of a low-level criminal going, well, probably gonna go get webbed up today, but we're gonna give it a shot. All right, see you later, honey. Like that's part of their speech to each other. How you doing? You doing good? You get webbed up. I got webbed up. Ah, shit, dude. I'm sorry.
Don't do the laundry yet. I have a feeling I'm gonna have undissolved web on me later
hang on,
tonight.
I'm probably gonna get webbed up. God,
the spectrum though of when you're gonna come back, you gotta be like, I'll either be back in an hour and like 3 years, one of the two.
Yeah.
So I always loved those characters, and then I think what was so cool is that they didn't go away. They still continue to exist in this world full of Thanos or these bigger threats. So the idea of like, who were these people and what's the reality to their situation, and like, what does it take to get up every morning, put on a snake costume, try to go, rob that jewelry store, just trying to make enough money to get by, pay your alimony, grab a beer at the end of the day at the bar with no name or wherever. Like, I love that these guys weren't aspirational. They were just doing what the only job they thought they could do, and I think that's so cool. And I think the big other ingredient to Minor Threats is crime fiction. And we love the kind of like low level criminal, trying to pull off a job kind of outside of his or her skill set, trying to make a change in their life because they're stuck in a rut. And I think a lot of these supervillains are those types of characters who they don't have bigger dreams of ruling the world. They just want a slightly better life, a slightly better place in the world. And I think that's incredibly relatable. And again, being influenced by, Coen Brothers films and stuff like that, where a lot of those are the kind of low level, criminal, merging those two felt very natural.
Yeah. What about you, Patton? Like, why do you love those types? Is it kind of more the same with that Jordan was saying?
I love the unflamboyant professional in a flamboyant world.
Yeah,
there's something about that is that one of my favorite panels in comics is in the great run on Suicide Squad, where Captain Boomerang goes back to his room in Belle Reve, and there's like 3 or 4 other Captain Boomerang costumes like hanging on hangers in his closet. Like, of course, you would have spares. They're going to get dirty. Like, just little considerations like that. Really, I love those details, and I just love the idea of professionalism in the face of wonder and superheroics in a world full of superpowers and weird abilities. But in that world, they're still like, I just need to make money. Like, the Rhino is one of my favorite Spider-Man characters because he is, even in the middle of battle, he'll just go, this guy's just paying me. I don't care about beating you. It's not personal. I'm here to do this. You can make this easy or hard. I don't know what it's just, I don't know. I love low level criminality. I love low stakes crime.
Yeah. I mean, going back to my guy Stiltman, I mean, the first appearance of that character was him showing up out of nowhere, distracting with a runaway car, and then using his stilts to use a vacuum cleaner to steal everyone's like valuables from a rooftop party because he was really high. He couldn't reach down. But the thing that's really the thing I really love about Stiltman is by
the way, Stiltman, Jordan and I are haunted by Stiltman because when we were doing MODOK and we were asking Marvel, like, can we use Iron Man? They're like, absolutely. Can we use Mr. Sinister? Go right ahead. And then we wanted Stiltman in the bar with no name, and they went, you can't use Stiltman. Are there Stiltman plans? Is there a Stiltman? Like, if they did, if they're letting the Safdie brothers do a low level, street level, Stiltman movie with Joaquin Phoenix as Stiltman, oh my God, that would be amazing.
Yes.
But they were adamant you can't have Stiltman.
We tried, David.
But what does that mean? What does that mean that they're like, no, don't touch Stiltman?
So Jordan told me that last time, and ever since then, my mind has been racing. But I mean, the whole thing was he was going to be the bartender at the bar with no name, right? So he could reach the top shelf stuff. Mm-hmm. That is A+ Stiltman comedy. I absolutely love it. But the thing I really love about the character, though, is kind of what you're saying with Captain Boomerang. There's been like 7 Stiltmen, which means that 7 different people have thought that this was a good idea.
Or stole the equipment. Like, there was one guy that knew how to build it, but he wasn't smart enough to keep it away from other criminals, and they just keep stealing it from him. Oh my god! I just thought of something for minor
Yeah,
threats.
yeah,
There we go.
yeah.
We should do an issue, Jordan, but the issue is from the point of view of a piece of equipment that just keeps moving around, like through the years,
Oh my
getting
God.
stolen by different people, and we just follow that thing. Story. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I mean, but that's it though. It's just like those grinders, like they look at it and they see those stilts and they don't think this is stupid. They're like, this is opportunity. And I think that
Yeah.
that's one of the cool things about it. Like you look at the characters in there, it's like, Pigeon Pete. I mean, he has no discernible skills. He carries pigeons and he's got seemingly bombs on him. But I mean, but he wants to do it.
Well, he stole some stuff and doesn't know how to use it. And I think back in the day, he was the message system.
Oh,
Yeah.
Then cell phones and the internet just made him immediately obsolete.
yeah.
Yeah.
Poor Pigeon Pete.
Poor Pigeon Pete.
Let's jump into Minor Threats. It's your upcoming miniseries at Dark Horse with artist Scott Hepburn, colorist Ian Herring, and letter Nate Picos that connects with your love of all of this stuff. I'm going to do a quick spiel. It's about what happens when a villain named Stickman kills the sidekick of Twilight City's #1 crime fighter, the Insomniac, how the city turns into a police state when the top super team tries to catch the killer before the Insomniac himself kills someone, and how a ragtag team of villains led by former villain and current bartender Playtime decides to take out Stickman before the heroes. So, basically things can go back to normal before they all lose or get beaten to death, basically. I absolutely love the first issue. I'm going to do, this is my elevator pitch for it that I came up with it. It's like superior foes of Spider-Man, but for Black Hammer if it was blended with the Warriors. That's what I got.
God
Love it.
damn.
A lot of
Thank
stuff
you.
I love right there.
Hell yes.
So I know this was born from a Batman pitch you had that was fairly similar, Patton, but what made you two want to blow the roots of that story out into your own thing altogether?
We had worked with a lot of different IPs and they're very fun, but you can only tell that story. And the more I was working with that, the original idea, it was a thing that I was going to pitch to DC called J. And it was about the Joker has escaped from Arkham Asylum and a group of literally C-list supervillains, Calculator, Copperhead, Calendar Man, Crime Doctor, Crazy Quilt, get together to capture Jay and hand him over to the Batman. But then I was like, wait a minute, I just want to stay in this world, in the low-level world. The more I read about these characters, that was way more fun. So I told this to Jordan and he just immediately clicked on it and started creating these characters and the idea of the city. Like just watching him expand it was amazing. So, and it just, the more we talked about it, the more we realized this is a whole world, that we can keep adding to.
Yeah, it was great because it was like, I think I had been developing kind of a similar thing about, D-listers. So I was able to kind of pull some characters, from that. And then Patton had this amazing structure and kind of story in place of like the idea of telling, that there's a giant quote unquote Batman Joker story going on, but you're not seeing it from either of their sides. You're seeing it from the little guys who are suffering because, it doesn't benefit them when a big A-list villain takes the city hostage. It only makes their lives more miserable. And I think that's such a cool thing. I love, jumping to perspectives we've never seen. So the idea of, there's a huge A story happening, on the edges of our comic, but we're not following that. We're following this other story from the people who shouldn't even be involved in this, that it's so outside their league. So to me, I think that was so brilliant to go there and then that be the entrance into this world and get to explore the culture. I think we've hit on earlier of like, that there's second generation villains and sidekicks and gear that gets passed along, and where do they get their clothes tailored, and what is going through the prison system like for a supervillain and coming out the other side, and just giving a reality to this world where yes, they're colorful costume characters with gimmicks, but they're also people who have like paid the price for going down this road.
Yeah, I mean, I do think one of the things that's interesting about it, and it ties into what you were saying. I mean, it's exactly what you're saying. It's kind of like a street level view to like an event story. It's like the death of Kid Dusk is what this in-world universe story would be called. Mm-hmm. And it's like getting that view of what the normal people, like the grinders over in Redport, are thinking about what's going on. Because I'm sure, I mean, like that's the thing. Going in, I went in fresh. I only knew that this involved C-list villains, and that's enough for me because I love C-list villains. But the thing that really surprised me when I was getting into it is like the hook of this being about them basically trying to do exactly what the super team is doing so they can get back to their normal lives. Like that's what the hook is.
Yes.
Like that was such a nice turn in that book. And you guys really nailed that beat.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you.
They want things to come. They can't work.
Yeah.
If the essentially our version of the Justice League is pulling everyone over and, and ripping them out of their lives and shaking them down for information. And, there's a bounty on this guy's head, on Stickman's head. So there's this chance of like, this could be the last job and I can walk away, and
that's money that can change my life. This isn't my regular score that keeps me alive for a couple of months. This is okay. I can leave now.
Yeah. And we're, we may be losers and the bottom feeders of this world, but we know the criminal underworld, so we can get to him first. We have that one benefit, we know how to navigate Redport. So, all that stuff I think was so fun to kind of put into the comic.
Who's the dude that gets like the crap kicked out of him in the beginning that like just shows up? The guy that's on, does he even have a name? The one that's on the pool table that's like
Reptilian.
Reptilian?
Yeah.
Oh my God. That, I have to admit, when I was going through that, the way that Scott drew him, just like the inset panels of like his bones being broken, all stuff like that, I'm like, oh my God, this is savage. He got like,
yeah. And that was thanks to a friend of mine's daughter is an EMT. So I would call her and consult her, like, how would Scalpel talk about what she's looking at? What is the slang terms that doctors use when they're looking at a patient? So that it came out really accurate.
Yeah.
And Reptilian, he seems like he's just kind of a device to get the story moving, but he will play a much bigger part. And I think what we tried to do with the first issue is it's all told through Frankie Playtime's, point of view, and she's our protagonist, and she continues to be, but there's all these characters that we meet in the first issue that sort of join up the gang, and each issue we're going to switch narrators, so you get to kind of understand who these characters are, and maybe you have these preconceptions based off like, oh, that's kind of like a out of shape, messy Riddler. Well, no, there's more to that character, and we're going to let him tell his story. That there's a tragedy, I think, behind all of these characters, and even that little moment with Reptilian and Snake Stalker, the character who brings him in, like that's going to be a bigger part of the story.
Yeah,
I hope somebody gets him a wheelchair, because Jesus Christ, that guy got wrecked. Well, I mean, I do want to talk about the cast, because one of the things I really like is how there's kind of different flavors and like archetypes. Like I mentioned Pigeon Pete, he's like an old school villain type, but Scalpel, I like how you have like an evil night nurse, like this one that like is like the surgeon for like the villains out there. And then there's like Stickman, who I imagine is basically kind of like the Joker equivalent. He's like this bloodthirsty type with like 7 photos on the wall at the lower layer. But it seems like in some ways like you're trying to provide like a cross section of like the varieties of villains we've seen throughout history. It's like the different types. Is that kind of what you're doing? You're trying to like look to find, like, represent like comic book history in this cast to a certain degree?
Yeah. I mean, Pat, do you want to talk about like kind of, there's like a little bit of a meta narrative, I think, behind this being the end of a, Bronze Age, Silver Age, and maybe the beginning of kind of a darker, more modern age happening. That's why we kind of chose to, hint at something that felt a little closer to Death in the Family, something like that. That's kind of on purpose.
Yeah. The idea that what it must have looked like on street level for us, it was, hey, we've been reading these Silver Age comics, and then suddenly Dark Knight Returns comes out. And everything after that is grim. And oh my God. So for us comic readers, this is great. But for a street level person in that world, that must have felt really weird and scary. So that's what's kind of happening here is we are moving from the fun, bright 70s into, oh, now Frank Miller's writing this shit. Wait a minute. What, could you imagine being in a world that was being written by, Denny O'Neil or whomever in the 70s, and then suddenly Frank Miller comes along, like, did the Joker just shoot that guy? What's happening? So all of our favorite archetypes is the kind of the sort of out of place, obsolete, colorful 30s, 40s villain in Pigeon Pete, the brainiac type who thinks he's A-list and won't accept anything less. I love crime doctors. I love the bent doctor who is working for the mob, or just, you can bring people to me and I'll keep it hush hush. We just really had a lot of fun with a lot of the comic tropes, and not trying to deconstruct them or criticize them. We love them, and we're trying to show how they're struggling to survive in this world.
Yeah.
You know, if anything, we're anti deconstruction. We're trying to show how these people are trying to prevent taking apart so that they can live.
They're trying to prevent Frank Miller.
Yes. That's
Stave
what
off.
they're trying. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, the other thing we wanted to do with our main cast, especially like kind of the characters in Minor Threats, was give them all different motivations that are very personal for why they agree to take on this impossible mission to go hunt down Stickman. And, a character like Scalpel, it's business. Like, she owns all these clinics that are all over town for supervillains, and they're all getting shut down by the Continuum, our version of the Justice League. So this is bad for business, and that's a good enough reason for her. And then some of the other characters, it's much more deeply personal.
Right.
And each issue, you kind of figure out why they agreed to take on this almost suicide mission.
It's interesting thinking about this versus like what it could have been, like with Patton, your pitch with Jay and everything. It's like you kind of touched on this, but if you did this story at DC, and this is not me defaming DC, this is just practicality as a storytelling. If you started with 5 characters, like all the C's, the C-listers and everything like that, all of a sudden they'd be like, well, maybe you could have a little bit more Batman in there, or maybe you could have a little bit more of the Joker in there, and then next thing it's kind of like with Stiltman. Like, who would have expected you couldn't use Stiltman? And like that's just kind of the nature of when you're working with other people's characters.
Yeah.
And it seems like with this, it's like you can have one of my favorite beats from the first issue is Playtime when she's meeting with her kind of like parole officer, I guess.
Yeah.
Yep.
And like there's the page of her trying to like get back into society, and it's just not working because she's a meta and because she's a felon and all that. Maybe you wouldn't have been able to show that with like Calendar Man or Crazy Quilt. I mean, I don't even know what Crazy Quilt does during the day. I can't imagine he sees any POs or anything like that.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that's the type of things I think you can do when they're your own characters, is you have the freedom to kind of take them in directions that you wouldn't normally see them go in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a certain state of grace that has to be maintained, I think, in the bigger publishers, whereas for us, because we're introducing the readers from the ground floor up, we don't have a state of grace we have to maintain.
Right.
We can do way more different and way more shocking things with these characters, which I think made it way more fun and way more fun to write.
Yeah.
And I think on a thematic level too, because I think what ends up kind of coming out as we were writing it was that there's a little bit of classism, going on with these villains in the neighborhood they live in, and how it's not as protected or cared about by these heroes who are more concerned with, this thriving downtown, and that they're this kind of forgotten part of the city. And I don't think we could do that with Gotham or Metropolis without, kind of painting Batman or Superman in a negative light. And, I think one of the big things that unlocked this story was, Scott was really into developing the city as a character.
Yeah.
And it was one of the early discussions we had where we're like, let's go all in, let's make this the most Grant Morrison-esque city possible, where like it's endured and weathered 60 years of superhero continuity. So that's where the fallen kaiju bones that were just left there by the heroes because they couldn't be bothered to clean it up, or there's a time bubble that the EPA is still trying to figure out how to close. It takes up 6 blocks, and like we wanted that to suddenly the story was like, oh, it's not just getting to Stickman, it was like working your way across the city with so much history and surviving the night. I think you picked up on the warriors element of it, so it wasn't just rival gangs and stuff. It's the city itself is something you have to survive throughout the night.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the coolest things about the first issue. It's like the world building that goes into it. I mean, there's the kaiju, but I mean, like 2 pages later, is that like a Gundam suit or something like that like housing is built into, even with like one house in the hand, which was a really nice touch.
Well, it's a fallen Jaeger basically.
Okay.
Built that's a wonderful lived workspace that we can use. Yeah, it's that absolutely. And if they let us keep building on this world, there's gonna be a whole storyline about that crappy neighborhood suddenly starts getting gentrified, and those people start getting, which that's gonna be a whole other battle, which I love. I remember I was driving around Silver Lake one day, a year ago, and there was suddenly out of nowhere, like overnight, there was a Starbucks and a Chipotle, and I'm like, this is the end of Silver Lake. It was like, that's when that is dropped into your neighborhood's done.
The interesting thing about it, though, is world building is one of those like funny ideas that sounds like something. I mean, everyone does it to a certain degree, but one of the things I really love about it is like you put that Jaeger, you put that there, and that's a story you could tell. That could be like a prequel story of like how that got there.
Yeah.
And it seems like you all and Scott are having a blast, like kind of doing the world building part, but you put all these different elements there, and those are stories that could be told in this universe. I mean, that's one of the cool things about world building is it's just basically speaking into existence like continuity.
Yeah.
Well, Scott is as much a writer on this as we are at this point. We throw a million concepts at him, but he will draw in background characters that have sparked us to think of a whole other stories for them. He's drawn in details that we didn't put in the script that we're like, wait a minute, that's a whole other story. This is great. So yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, that little bear that shows up that Playtime makes on the cover of the first issue, we're like, this guy's amazing. And then finally, he has a much bigger part in the later in the fourth issue because we just loved it. Or he had this other character he created called Shit Eater, which is just this fly in a punk jacket at the bar.
I love
and
Shit Eater
we were like,
so
who
much.
is this? He's like, oh, it's Shit Eater. I've always just wanted to draw him. Like, well, he's going to be a much bigger part of this world going forward. It's really organic, the writing and the art. And then Scott, the other thing is like putting in all these details, like you said, of like, again, this is a world that's weathered, poison ivy kind of character trying to launch killer plants. So he just has these dead husks of killer plants, on the roofs of buildings. And he's got alien goo with eyeballs, that just no one ever cleaned up. That's just kind of growing on the sides of walls. And, I love that kind of stuff where it's like, that's probably what would happen because life continues in this city. Like, there's no damage control or like reset that I think a lot of the big two have. It's like, no, that's there now. You're just going to have to deal with it on your commute to work.
Yeah. The one that gets me, the detail that Scott worked in there, I'm guessing it was not in the script, is the cat with the really long tail in front of lower layer. Like that running across, I'm just like, I want to know the story of that cat. Of course, I also have a cat currently meowing outside my door. So
he wants to come in.
Oh, yeah, very much wants to come in. And now, a quick word from one of off-panel sponsors. Macroverse is a next-generation digital comics platform, and one with an astonishing number of comics, with currently over 50 series from over 100 creators on their app, with a 5-star rating both on Apple and Google's app stores. Download the app and binge all their titles, including the Eisner-nominated Remind from Jason Brubaker, Lisa K. Weber's Hex 11, which has been described as Harry Potter meets Blade Runner, or the new queer supernatural adventure series Husk that launches on November 1st. It's just $4.99 a month to subscribe to Macroverse, with proceeds directly supporting the creators on the platform. Keep an eye on the future of Macroverse 2, as 2022 is going to bring an epic upgrade that offers a new level of digital collectability and more, with early adopters able to sign up for more information at macroverse.com. And now, back to the show. I do want to say it's funny. The bar with the no name is the obvious like connecting point here because you worked with that and MODOK and everything like that. I'm gonna throw out another bar. The one that really like connects me here is the Cauldron in Gotham and Noonan's Bar, like from Hitman. I don't know if you guys read that.
Oh, yeah, I remember Noonan's Bar.
The Cauldron is kind of like the equivalent of Redport, where it's like, that's the place even Batman doesn't even really like going.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see like that side being focused on because, tying into this, I guess, like lower layers is kind of like the headquarters for all these people. It's where it's all starting.
Yeah.
What's the appeal of those spaces to you guys?
I love an unofficial office space for criminal deeds where nothing can be written down. It's all and it's also a lot of it is done in what's called thieves' cant, where it's like they're talking about crimes, but not in a way that if you weren't in that world, you wouldn't know they were doing it. Like, hey, I got there's a really fast car that my cousin just bought. It goes between 60 and 100. And if you were if you wanted to take a drive on it, I'd love to. I bet you'd like, oh, he's offering him a job as a getaway driver on a job they're going to do between 60,000 and 100, like that kind of thing. All the Parker novels have a lot of that. The Richard Stark Parker novels are great at that. So I love that.
That element is huge. And then also we're going to see how the other side lives, sort of, and that like we're gonna see where the upscale villains go. And obviously we were inspired by like the Iceberg Lounge, and like I love that, like, there are different levels to where you're allowed to drink in this town. And we wanted to show where these guys start out, and then eventually they're gonna, run into in the second issue into our version of the Iceberg Lounge, which Scott has drawn the hell out of.
I also love the idea of a criminal hangout, that there are, without ever showing it, there are unspoken deals that certain criminals have made with certain heroes, where it's like, you could lock me up, you could also keep me on the street, and I can feed you information, which is that great tense thing. One of the things I really loved about the Batman movie, the Matt Reeves one, was they show the origin of Batman and Penguin's very unsteady relationship of, okay, wait, you see Batman realizing, actually, better if this guy, we leave him on the street, because I can get information out of him. And you can tell he hates having to do that, but he's learning, oh, this is how the crime world works.
Yeah, I mean, I love that beat too. And like the other thing that's really cool about this though is it's interesting. It's like C-listers are a lot of people look at them. What a Wizard used to call them, like morts, the morts of the month. Like that was like the whole
Mort
thing.
Of the month, that's right.
The mort of the month. These are all morts of the month. But the thing I really like about it, and like this, I don't know if this was a you guys. I mean, obviously the framed pictures came from the script for sure. But this is one of those attribution magic of comics things. I don't know if it was you or if it was Scott or if it was all of you together. But you can see that these dumb villains are prideful. Like they know they love what they do. There's a lot of, they're proud about what they do. Like they have the frame pictures up on the wall. Like Brainwave wants to get in that space, and like stupid Stickman has 7 up there. But then also like above the bar, there's all the masks. And it's showing it, and it's like they're proud of their history. There's like this pride to it that I think is pretty spectacular.
Except that pride is an Achilles heel sometimes, and look, pride is what brought down a lot of real life gangsters.
Yeah,
they wanted to show off, and then that's what fucked them. So that's a part that that is a part of the criminal world. How much pride do you show? When do you learn to lay low?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other part, we wanted it to feel like we said, like a lived in culture, that there is this, they talk about this code they have amongst each other. And I think the Rogues and Flash do that really well, where there's a weird honor system. There's a weird, I used to hold jobs with your mom, and we've got a history, so I'm going to look out for you. And like, there's a little bit of family to, I think, this group, because all they have is each other, really.
Yeah, the Black Label Rogue series that's happening right now at DC is pretty spectacular in terms of that. All the Black Label stuff you were talking about earlier about classism. Did you read the other history of the DC universe?
Yes.
Yeah.
So good.
Oh my fucking God. That scene where Black Lightning just reads Superman the Riot Act about how why are you even showing up lecturing me? You never come down here. It really shows you where we are now, where even the majors, and same with Falcon and the Winter Soldier on Disney Plus, where they really looked at Captain America and the Avengers and went, a lot of that was bullshit. A lot of that was just imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
They give Zemo a weird point about white supremacy, and where he's like, hey, you're the guys who use the super soldier serum, not us. You believe in supremacy. We don't. Like, clearly, who's the Nazi? Like, I was stunned that they actually put all that out on a show. It was amazing.
Yeah. There's a lot of layers to this book that I really like. Like, the classism's really great, but also I think that you guys do some interesting stuff. I might be reading too much into this, so I'm going to throw this out there. But you do some interesting stuff exploring legacy and superheroes. Like, Toy Queen talks about legacy, but it's interesting because, like, Kid Dusk is the Insomniac's sidekick who is killed.
Yeah.
He has to be, like, near adult when that happens. I don't really know how old he's supposed to be, but regardless, it's like he's like a child soldier. He's born into this life like Robin.
Yep.
And Playtime is the lead to the story, and like she has that line in it about it. She's like, I wanted a parent and you wanted a sidekick. And her life has been ruined in a lot of ways by her time as a villain. It's interesting that these like focal points to the story are the characters who sort of got into that world before they had a say in the matter, and just like how much that cost them. Like, that's a really interesting wrinkle to the story.
Yeah, well, that comes from The Wire. I loved the D'Angelo Barksdale story about he's being forced into the life by his mom, by his uncle, because that's all they know. But they're like, it takes him a while to realize, and it's too late, that he doesn't belong in this world. He'd be better off without it. And then they parallel that later in season 4, when the one kid, one of the school kids whose father is one of Barksdale's soldiers, realizes, I got to get my kid out of this life.
Yeah.
And he actually has to shut his wife down because she's like, he's got to be a soldier. He's like, no, look what it got me. I'm in prison for life. Like, it's amazing. It's an amazing scene. So we wanted to touch on that because family still matters. She still loves her mom, but like, you said, I wanted you to be my mom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just it trapped both of them in this world. And I think one of the things we wanted to play with Frankie is she resents not having a choice, in the matter that she was kind of born into it, forced into it, in and out of jail, kind of stuck in this relentless cycle. But the other thing is she's good at it.
Yeah.
And has a natural talent for it. And I think that gives her, I think, more of an interesting arc for the series, which is like, I want out of this life, but what if this is the one thing I really excel at?
Yeah.
And this is my natural talent.
Yeah, that is a really nice touch. She is phenomenally designed. I want to start with that. Like, I love in the beginning, like she's got like the Rubik's Cube as her like belt buckle basically, but then later on it's like a Nintendo controller, which is like just a really nice touch. There's so much to her. And then like also like the toys that you all come up with, like the Scott comes up with, like the you mentioned the kind of teddy bear that's like the teddy bear of doom.
Yeah.
I am interested in what made that character an ideal protagonist for this story, because obviously there's a lot of heavies in there. This is like the character that regrets it in a way that the others maybe don't. Like, what made that an interesting wrinkle to the story?
Well, I think we wanted to position it in a way where, like, Frankie, she's doing everything she can to connect with this daughter that this life has kind of put up these walls between, and she tries to do everything right and ends up right back where she started, serving drinks to these supervillains,
right?
And sees this little window of like, I can get the bounty, I can get out, and I can go be a mom and leave this all behind. But then the question becomes, does she really want to leave it behind? Because we see her history with it, and again, her being good at it. But the idea of the toy stuff kind of came out of like, there's an innocence, again, we said, to these Silver Age, Bronze Age characters, where like it's the gimmick first and then you figure out who the characters are. And we tried to kind of work that in. If this is like a childhood loss, like lost, then like this is her. She's like, she talks about how she can build anything, but it always comes out as these toys, and she doesn't know if it's like a psychological impairment or something. But like that, like there was these people could probably have these amazing lives outside of supervillainy, but they're trapped in it. And we liked the idea that she has this amazing skill, but it's so limited to working within the world of being a supervillain.
Yeah.
Well put. Yeah.
That's one of the fascinating wrinkles to it, because like her mom has that line of like, I was a thief, but you were like special, basically.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of unlocked my ability to be great as a villain. Like I could go toe to toe with the Insomniac because you could make these things. It is really fascinating. But I do want to. Scott Hepburn's come up a bunch. He's the artist of the book. You worked with him on MODOK Head Games, and while he did a great job there, I gotta say, he's like going off here. I told you before that there's a lot of James Herron in his art, and I say that as a James Herron super fan. But I had a patron question about Scott. Dennis Hoffman asked, what made Scott the right artist for Minor Threats? Was it just basically you guys had a great time working with him before, and it was a case of let's just get the band back together?
Yeah, it was absolutely. We loved his stuff on MODOK. He always went above and beyond and added angles that we hadn't thought of. And then once we started formulating this book, it was such a no-brainer. Like, oh, let's let Scott just run rampant in this world.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We knew how to write for him too, and like all his strengths play into, I think, the strength of the story. He's incredible at huge high octane action, but he's also amazing at like just facial expressions and acting and small moments. So we knew that this was going to be kind of a hybrid of all of that, and like we could just write things that he wanted to draw and get him involved at the earliest stage and help create this with us. So it's been just the easiest process in the world.
He's kind of got like a foot in each era of comic history in his art. Like there's like a little of like I said, James Herron in there, but there's also just like, you look through it and there's just like a little bit of everything in there. And also I do want to say Ian Herring's colors, especially on that flashback for like differentiating like the eras and everything like that, does a phenomenal job on this book too.
Yeah.
But the one thing the one thing that really ties this all together, I love Scott's covers. If you're gonna go for something that evokes a feel, his corner boxes get that for me big time. They're just absolutely incredible.
Yes. Well, that was Jordan's idea. The corner boxes will reflect where the story is, and I just love that so much. Oh my God, that made me so happy.
Well, I think the three of us are just huge lovers of the medium, so it's like every little piece that goes into a comic, from the corner boxes to the editor notes to the captions, like it's all a part of storytelling that's so unique to comics. So it's like, how do we utilize everything? And there were so many visual ideas that came out of it. Like we were talking about doing a recap page. which we have, but then we see Pigeon Peak map of the city. So it shows us all the places we've been and where we're going and
it changes
to avoid.
Yeah.
And it changes each issue. And again, it was like, well, that's instead of just having tech, let's see it in visual form. So I think we were always asking that question, how do we embrace comics more for every little piece of this, from corner boxes to recap pages? And, I think it was a big thing Pat and I talked about where, there's a lot of times I think, TV writers come into this medium and just take a pilot and turn it into a comic. And it's like, we never wanted to talk about what this could be later. It was like, how do we make just the best comic possible? And how do we, only think of it in terms of comics, and if anything else comes out of it, great. But that's how we want to kind of enter this story, is just like a love letter to comics, utilizing the language of comics in a way that we haven't been able to write before.
And now, a quick word from one of Off-Panel's sponsors. It's Bad Idea still. I have good news. They got back to me on a script for an ad. I also have bad news. They told me to come up with it because they're busy baking. So I hear they're making donuts now? I don't know what's going on. Bad Idea is over. Let's get back to the podcast. That's the other interesting side of the freedom that we were talking about earlier. It's like, freedom of characters is one thing. Like, you would have the freedom to do whatever you want because these are your characters. But the other thing is like, because this is your baby, because this is like creator owned, you can come up with, solutions for the covers. You can make it like this holistic package that feels like its own thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the nice things about doing this yourself, is like the whole thing feels like it's from this universe, and it feels like it's coming from the same place. And like when everything is moving in the same direction, it just feels a little different, if you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I did want to ask, you two have worked together before. You worked on Hulu's MODOK, and then you also worked on MODOK Head Games at Marvel with Scott. And I'm sure that was a pretty formative experience with your partnership and everything. But, when you were doing those things together, what did you learn about the types of stories you wanted to tell together, and, how to best collaborate together that you carried into this? Besides, obviously, more of having like armadillo types in the story. I love armadillo, by the way. Way to make me love armadillo, which are something I never expected.
We love him
Poor
too.
guy. That poor guy. He's so sweet.
I feel like, Pat and I speak the same language when it comes to comics and movies and references. And I think even tone too, where, as much as we love comedy and there's comedic elements in Minor Threats, we're always much more interested in the kind of emotional weight behind it, or the tragedy that often kind of creates comedic characters. And that was something we talked about, at great lengths when creating this from the ground up, which is something we played with in MODOK and in the comic. And, we developed other shows and projects and stuff in the past, but I think we always come at it from the same angle of the emotional core of the story. And then we kind of build off references and, genre and all the things that we want to incorporate into it.
How much of your process is just basically having conversations and just riffing on things and snowballing from there?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, that's how a lot of it starts. And then luckily, Jordan is so much better at story structure. And here's how we get all your crazy ideas that you just farted out into an actual story that makes sense. So he's really good at, corralling my dumb kind of, but then we also do this, and then this guy come in with, so yeah, thank God.
You're chaos and he's order.
I think I'm mouth and he's brains. That's I'd put it more that way.
Okay.
We do give ourselves at least like an hour, like that'll be just for tangents.
Yes.
Having fun talking about like, have you watched this? What if we did this? Oh, wait, did you check that out? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Bitching about everything and oh my God, what the fuck?
That's always incorporated into our workday.
I love that.
Yes.
It's scheduled, unscheduled time.
Yes.
There you go.
I like it. I like it. Well, I had another patron question. It was Dennis Hoffman again about how this ended up at Dark Horse versus Image or Vault or even a Kickstarter. I suspect it's not a what drove you there as much as a who drove you there, but I'm curious, how did it end up at Dark Horse?
Well, I had just done a one-off comic for Black Hammer, and our editor Daniel Chabon was like, do you have any other ideas? And then I told Jordan that he had that interest, and then we said, oh, let's take it to him, and then they loved it. So I'd already had the relationship there.
Yeah, and Daniel has been incredible in shepherding this, and
oh my God, he's so good.
And his notes are fantastic, and then also talent he has amassed to do variant covers.
He's got a Mike Mignola cover.
Yeah. Oh boy.
It still doesn't feel real, but that's something we wrote. His image on the cover, and I think Scott too. Like Mignola's Scott's hero, so he was so taken aback and blown away. And they were asking for ideas of like who should he draw, and like Scott's like, I want to see him do Stickman. That's Scott's favorite design, I think, in the whole book. So
yeah.
I mean, they haven't announced half of them yet, but it was just like, who are your favorite people to ever work in comics? Okay, they're going to do covers for you. And it's unbelievable. So I can't wait to announce the rest, but so far it's a murderer's row.
Daniel, I mean, that guy is like the comics creator whisperer. Like everybody that works with him just absolutely loves him. And it just seems like, I don't know, it seems like he's very good at getting the most out of any story. I mean, granted, like when you're like editing Black Hammer, which is incredible. I mean, that definitely, there's only so bad that Jeff Lemire and all the rest of them can really get.
Right.
But at the same time, like, I mean, that guy's good.
Yeah. And he helped cultivate this original superhero universe, which is hard to do these days. Like,
yeah, I know.
I think beyond Black Hammer and the stuff Astro City and the stuff Kyle Higgins is doing, with Radiant Black, like it's a really hard thing to get off the ground, and I think he's been really helpful in like kind of guiding that.
Well, it's a tough thing to sustain too, because it's like there's ideas there, but like maintaining interest, but also like continuing to build it in a way that feels like it's all together. Like Black Hammer is a great example. There's all the different side stories that connect to it. Like I was what was it, Dr. Star is my favorite. Like that one absolutely kills me. But
oh yeah,
that one's so good. Your Black Hammer Vision story, Patton, was very good. I love that issue. It was great.
Oh my God, thanks, man.
It is interesting. It's like something can seem like there's a lot to it, but it isn't. It's tough to continue to build. But I mean, we touched on this already. I mean, this is a very lived in world with lots of potential, but it's also like I do think that this at least first volume of Minor Threats benefits from being very focused, like that Warriors angle to it, like the whole survive the night thing, I think gives it a lot of the spice. But do you view this as like a sandbox that you're hoping to keep playing in going forward?
Oh my God, absolutely. I mean, again, we're already building ideas for stories out to the side. We'll just see how it does, and hopefully they'll let us keep building the world of Twilight City and beyond Twilight City, the places outside of it.
Oh God,
yeah, we'd love to keep exploring that. And I think we have at least several arcs kind of planned out that involve some of the characters in this current story, as well as going back to different eras too. I really want to see more of Toy Queen and what the 70s, 80s of this world kind of look like. And, I think there's just so much room to play. So, hopefully we get to do more.
You know what I think is funny about like Toy Queen and the idea of going back? It's kind of like, I'm a big sports fan, and you watch, like, I watch the NBA, and like you watch NBA players from like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and they talk about the sport, and they're always like, it was way better back then. It was like so much better back then.
Yeah.
I feel like you probably get that with like Toy Queen, where it's, or like, the other villains that were around back then. It's like, there was the code then. Like everyone was honorable back then.
Right.
Now they're beating the shit out of people and leaving them on pool tables over here. I mean, it is interesting because I imagine there's like almost like nostalgia within that world too.
Oh, big time. I think that's a huge part of Pigeon Pete's story in this, which is a guy who doesn't want to let go of a period that's already passed him by. There's this relevant,
right,
and also just a deep love for the good old days. So why can't we bring them back? But maybe that ship has sailed.
Yeah. Well, to close, I want to close with something that was not related to Minor Threats. I want to talk about, I don't know, I think one thing that's really great about the two of you is obviously you're working in a lot of different capacities outside of comics, but you always like endlessly rep comics. Like Patton, a great example is a buddy of mine, Gavin Guidry. You repped his book Going to the Chapel that he did with David Pepose.
Oh my God, it's so fucking good.
Well, and like Gavin, I remember I was in this DM thread with him about basketball, and it was like a birthday present mixed with a Christmas present mixed with like, it was just like everything. And like, that's like one of the cool things is you two, like, and Jordan, like, your thread about like the best superhero costumes was an absolute blast.
Oh yeah, I love that.
So those things, it's just cool seeing you guys tout your love of comics and everything like that. But I am interested. You obviously have a lot of opportunities. You have a lot of options. Why do you think that love of the medium is something you two have carried with you throughout your lives and continue to celebrate in things like this?
Because I keep seeing the medium evolve and take new steps forward. I think even more than a lot of other mediums, it is very, very open to new talents and new ways of telling stories, both either a from the ground up original idea or letting someone come in and play in an established sandbox and mess around with stuff, but in a really brilliant way. The other history of the DC universe was a perfect example of that. So anything that's going to keep staying creative and enthusiastic about itself is going to create that enthusiasm in me.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like as the world becomes more corporate and 4-quadrant, like the stories that you can tell in comics have always been leagues ahead of everything else, because
Yes.
you're not worrying about budget and, am I going to get this big opening weekend or, am I going to have millions of viewers to get a second? You just need enough people who are excited about big ideas, complex ideas, crazy characters. And I just think there's the freedom where you can tell the stories as big as you want without having to worry about all those other things that get factored into other medium. I think it's just a freedom in comics to explore in a way that you don't have in TV and film.
I mean, that's what they always say is like the only limitation to comics is your imagination. Now, I'm sure Scott would disagree with that because if you just kept writing crowd scene after crowd scene, he'd probably murder you guys. But at the same...
Oh, we are. And he's mad. No,
Yeah.
he actually likes that stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that is at least in part true. There's an unfettered nature to comics as a medium that if you dream it, you can make it. If you don't even have to be that great. I mean, like, Patton, I'm with you. I always want to be a comic book artist, but I was terrible. Like, I studied Bart Sears and how to draw the comics way. The thing I never got, and I've admitted this before, so I'm going to admit it again, is like, you know how they would always want you to draw like the line through for like the eyes and everything like that? I always would do that. And I was like, how do I get rid of that? Like, I've already drawn that. Now I just have this stupid line here. I was like, oh my God, I just fucking erase it. I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
But I mean, that is one of the cool things, though, is even if you're not like a Scott Hepburn, you can look at people who have done incredible things telling stories with like very simple art, and it just kills because it's funny or it's heartfelt or it's something. And like, and if you dream it, it can happen in comics.
A great way to put it.
Yeah. One more thing I just wanted to add is I think the other reason why we're always pushing comics too is I think Pat and I are very invested in creator rights and the idea that comics have captured now the imagination of everyone, but not everyone knows Jack Kirby, or Jim Starlin or whoever, and that I think is a reason to always be pushing the comics is that I don't think enough attention is being put back on the people who are literally creating the stories that my kids have toys of and cartoons and this and that. And I think we really are any chance we can to showcase that, or call back to that. We try to.
One thing I realized as I was kind of thinking about this book and thinking about like your guys' love of comics, I love that you guys both still go to comic shops too. Like you're kind of Wednesday Warriors-ish.
Yep.
It is kind of funny. I was thinking about it. I think comic shops are like our lower layer. I think that's our our bar with no name. It's like the place where
you put it.
Yeah. It's like the place where all of us lifers go.
Wow.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah, I like it.
Anyways, well, that's all I have for you. Patton, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on to talk about minor threats, C-list villains, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Jordan Blum and Patton Oswalt. You can find their work in the upcoming Minor Threats at Dark Horse Comics and each of them on Twitter. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman as well, who edited this podcast and made it sound as good as it does. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, features, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following it on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Jingo Bowen, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Ben Damstead, Rom V, Devin Fitzsimons, Nick Walker, Patrick Hoyle, Isaac Warren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Capes and Ties Podcast, Klaus Van de Ven, Brian, Submet Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Elliot Metz, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Scott Buwan, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePills, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Guarino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Pulla, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Philip Myra, Christian Sheldon, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacello, Torrin Grunenbeck, Buzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Paul Stolates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ryanwan, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairburn, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.